Good morning. Happy Mother's Day, and welcome to the live online service of the Unitarian Universalist Church of Urbana-Champaign. I am Reverend Florence Kaplow, and I am so glad that you have joined me and the others of our online community this morning. If you'd like to follow along with our order of service, you can find it on the same YouTube page below the video. And also, I want to thank again WRFU FM 94.5 for streaming this service live on the radio for those who don't have access to being able to watch the video. In preparation for this Mother's Day service, I have been thinking about how we in this country have sanitized motherhood. I think it might be a legacy of our 1950s myth of happy mothers home in the house. I'm not sure where it comes from, but I do believe that it does a great disservice to the realities of mothering. That we take away the power, the grief, the complexities, the difficulties, the tenacity of real flesh and blood mothers. So today, I want to lift up a very different image and vision of motherhood, expressed through the many movements for social change all over the world, led by mothers. And I also particularly want to honor the mothers in this congregation, the mothers of school-age children who have persisted through an extraordinarily difficult year together. May you find some inspiration to carry on, since we are not yet, especially for school-age children, out of the pandemic yet. May you find some inspiration through these stories. And I want you who are listening this morning, you mothers of school-age children, to know that this service is dedicated to you, particularly, as well as to all mothers everywhere. Also, if you want to honor a mother in your life this morning, there is a Jamboard, which the mothers of school-age children will be very familiar with, and there's a link to that also on the same YouTube page. And you can go there, and on the left-hand side, there's a little icon for a sticky note, and you can click on that, and you can write a little note to your mother. And that could be a mother that is still with us or a mother who has passed away. And if all that just seems too complicated and you don't happen to have a school-age child in your house that you can ask help from, you can just send something to Joys and Sorrows as well. That's another possibility. But this is an opportunity to say out loud how we are grateful for our mothers. As one of our spiritual and justice practices together, each Sunday we begin our service with a land acknowledgement, acknowledging the native peoples on the land, from the land on which we gather. And wherever you are listening this morning, I invite you to bring to mind the indigenous peoples of your place. I was very honored to be invited to speak these words on Friday in downtown Champaign. A group of local activists were protesting in front of Chase Bank in support of the indigenous water protectors up in Minnesota who are working to stop what is called Line 3, which is one of the big pipelines bringing tar sands oil from Alberta to Lake Superior. And Chase Bank is the biggest funder of that project. And there was a wonderful group of people, including several from the congregation, in front of the bank with handmade signs, that many of them works of art, asking that the bank defund line 3. And so these words were spoken on the street as well the other day. There'll be a moment of silence after the acknowledgement, and in that silence, I invite you to consider what you might do today in support of Indigenous peoples. We recognize and acknowledge that we gather today on Indigenous land, taken through deception, coercion, and violence. We acknowledge the continued displacement and oppression of Native peoples and honor their commitments to survival, identity, and the protection of our world. Thank you.
We light this chalice, symbol of our Unitarian Universalist tradition, to mark out this time together as special and worthy. If you have a chalice or a candle at home, we invite you to join us in lighting it and speaking these shared words as printed on your screen and in your order of service. We light our chalice this Mother's Day with deep gratitude for those who have given us life, as well as for all who have nurtured and nourished us, who have cared for and loved us, who have passed on their light to us so that we may shine. Come, let us spend this time together.
Be kind to your parents, though they don't deserve it. Remember that grown-ups is a difficult stage of life. They're apt to be nervous and overexcited, confused by the daily storm and strife. Just keep in mind, though it seems hard, I know, most parents were children long ago. Incredible. So treat them with patience and kind understanding, in spite of the foolish things they do. Someday you might wake up and find you're a parent too.
This is the second year that our own Gloria Cruz has offered a sweet and funny song for Mother's Day. I sincerely hope that this will become a UUCUC tradition. Thank you so much, Gloria, and your parents for making this possible. Now you are going to hear some readings about rad mothers and their movements for change in the world. Rad, you say? Depending on your generation, you may not know this word. It's a very 90s word. It means something like super cool, but it also means radical. Rad is short for radical. And just a reminder that we have Rad Mom buttons that will stay outside the church for another day if you haven't had a chance to pick one up for the mother in your life. The first reading we will hear this morning is Reverend Sally reading from a wonderful children's book about Mother Jones and the fight to end child labor. I grew up reading Mother Jones magazine, but I admit that I didn't know very much about her life. She was born in Ireland in 1837 and lived through the Great Famine before her family immigrated to Canada and then to the United States. She married a mine worker, and they had 4 children. But when she was 30 years old, there was a yellow fever epidemic in Memphis where they were living, and her husband and all of her children died in that epidemic. 4 years later, she lost everything she had left in the Great Chicago Fire. For the rest of her very long life, she turned her energies towards organizing for the rights of workers, especially for ending child labor, which was rampant in the United States at the end of the 19th century. She never gave up, and she never backed down. The story you're about to hear is from the perspective of some of those children. And one of the themes you will hear in all the readings this morning is that mothers' movements are dedicated to life, the lives of children, and all life. And they begin with the lived experience of motherhood itself and the grief, the deep grief of mothers when life is not honored or protected.
Hello, Reverend Sally here, coming to you from home. Today's story comes to us from a book called On Our Way to Oyster Bay, Mother Jones and Her March for Children's Rights, written by Monica Culling, illustrated by Felicita Sala, and published by Kids Can Press. And this is the telling of a true story. Grabbing a sign, 8-year-old Aiden joined the other striking cotton mill workers. He was a doffer. For 12 hours, 6 days a week, he and other boys removed full bobbins from the clacking spinning frames. Aiden's friend Gussie was a spinner at the mill. When a thread broke, she quickly repaired it by tying the 2 ends together. Knowing Aiden couldn't read, Gussie read his sign to him. It says, "We want to go to school." Aiden did want to go, but his family needed the money he earned. This was the way things were for many children in 1903. There was excitement on the picket line that day. Someone named Mother Jones was coming. She helped workers fight for better wages and safer working conditions. In her travels, Mother Jones had met hundreds of children working in factories and mills. Many were missing fingers. Some had even lost hands. Troubled by all she had seen, Mother Jones wanted to end child labor. But what could she do? Why? Organize a children's march and bring the message right to President Theodore Roosevelt at his summer home in Oyster Bay, of course. They marched out of town, playing flutes, beating drums, and waving flags. Mother Jones was leading the way to Oyster Bay. The days were long and hot, and the mosquitoes were biting. Each day, a few of the marchers quit, but not Aiden and Gussie. They enjoyed walking through fields of buttercups and visiting new towns, and it felt good to be doing something so important. Besides, if old Mother Jones could walk this far, why couldn't they? Aiden wasn't the only one in the group who couldn't read. At the end of each day, Mother Jones read the daily news aloud in her soothing Irish lilt. Some of the stories were even about the march. When they arrived in the next town, 3,000 people were gathered in the town's public park, waiting to hear Mother Jones speak. "All these people care about us," said an astounded Aiden. Gussie was so amazed she could only nod. Mother Jones spoke with force. "These children work 12 hours a day, 6 days a week. They work while other children go to school, play games, and enjoy life. Inspired and maybe a bit humbled, many of the townspeople offered their support and places to stay. Finally, a little over 2 weeks after the march started, the remaining 30 marchers arrived in New York City. It was their last stop before Oyster Bay. Stopping at the corner of 24th Street and 4th Avenue, Mother Jones held her meeting. More than 1,000 gathered to listen while the traffic whizzed around them. After the speech, the group started to prepare for the last stretch of the march. And the next day, the marchers walked the last 35 miles to Oyster Bay. It was a long, weary march, but finally they stood on the lawn of the president's summer home, waiting expectantly for him to appear. But President Roosevelt wouldn't speak with Mother Jones. "We've come from so far away," said Gussie. Aiden was angry as well as disappointed. How could he do this to us? It's not fair. Mother Jones put her arms around them. She could only agree. On the train ride back home, everyone was quiet. Only Mother Jones understood what they had achieved with the march. Many people now see that children don't belong in factories and mills, but in schools, she reminded them. Aiden thought about that. He was proud that he and Gussie had marched with Mother Jones. One day, he would learn to read, and when change came for mill children, he would be part of that too. The end.
The Appeal to Womanhood, now known as the Mother's Day Proclamation of 1870, was written by the Unitarian activist Julia Ward Howe. It was an appeal for women to unite for peace in the world in response to the American Civil War and the Franco-Prussian War. Again have the skill and power of two great nations exhausted themselves in mutual murder. Again have the sacred questions of international justice been committed to the fatal mediation of military weapons. In this day of progress, in this century of light, the ambition of rulers has been allowed to barter the dear interests of domestic life for the bloody exchanges of the battlefield. Thus men have done, thus men will do. But women need no longer be made a party to the proceedings which fill the globe with grief and horror. Despite the assumptions of physical force, the mother has a sacred and commanding word to say to the sons who owe their life to her suffering. That word should now be heard and answered to as never before. Arise, all women who have hearts, whether your baptism be that of water or tears, say firmly, we will not have great questions decided by irrelevant agencies. Our husbands shall not come to us reeking with carnage for caresses and applause. Our sons shall not be taken from us to unlearn all that we have been able to teach them of charity, mercy, and patience. We, women of one country, will be too tender of those of another country to allow our sons to be trained to injure theirs. From the bosom of the devastated earth, a voice goes up with our own. It says, disarm, disarm. The sword of more murder is not the balance of justice. Blood does not wipe out dishonor, nor violence vindicate possession. As men have often forsaken the plow and the anvil at the summons of war, let women leave all that may be left of the home for a great and earnest day of counsel. In the name of womanhood and humanity, I earnestly ask that a general Congress of women, without limit of nationality, may be appointed and held at some place deemed most convenient, and at the earliest period consistent with its objects, to promote the alliance of the different nationalities, the amicable settlement of international questions, the great and general interests of peace. Julia Ward Howe.
Another Mother for Peace was founded in 1967 by a group of women strongly opposed to the war in Vietnam. Their mission was to create a nonpartisan, nonprofit organization to educate women to take an active role in eliminating war as a means of solving disputes between nations, people, and ideologies. Dedicated to the principle that war is obsolete, AMP encourages its members to do peace homework by writing to elected government officials to express their desire for peace. Here is their manifesto. I join with my sisters in every land in the Pax Materna, a permanent declaration of peace that transcends our ideological differences. In the nuclear shadow, war is obsolete. I will no longer suffer it in silence, nor sustain it by complicity. They shall not send my son to fight another mother's son, for now, forever, there is no mother who is enemy to another mother.
Thank you to our readers, Reverend Sally and Emily Miller and Panay Beckett. And I particularly wanted to note Panay had a sunflower behind her, which is actually the symbol of another mother for peace. I want to share about Moms Demand Action. Moms Demand Action is a grassroots movement founded by Shannon Watts, a mother of two. The day after the Sandy Hook tragedy in 2007, Shannon started a Facebook group with the message that all Americans can and should do more to reduce gun violence. The online conversation turned into a movement of moms, dads, students, families, concerned citizens, and survivors working together with our partners in the gun violence prevention movement to end this uniquely American crisis. Moms Demand Action works to pass stronger gun laws and to close the loopholes that jeopardize the safety of all. They have established volunteer chapters in every state of the country and Washington, D.C., and they are part of Every Town for Gun Safety, the largest gun violence prevention organization in the country, with more than 6 million supporters and 375,000 donors. Several members of UUCUC are active in the local chapter of Moms Demand Action. Here are some words by our own Jenny Lakshan about why she is part of Moms Demand Action. Like a lot of other members, I joined after one of the big mass shootings that make the news. For me, it was Pulse nightclub in Orlando, where 49 people were killed and 53 more wounded. I'm almost ashamed now to admit that was what shook me into doing more about gun violence, when more people than that die from the everyday gun violence in communities around the United States. I've stood with mothers in Champaign-Urbana who have lost their sons to gun violence, and working alongside them is what keeps me going. I've been inspired by this group and have learned so much about advocacy and justice from them. It's amazing to see what a group that started from a mom's concern can do. And now we will sing one of our favorite hymns, Sweet Honey in the Rocks, We Are. Listen for the line about mothers of courage. And since you're in your living room, don't be afraid to belt out the hymn. As Unitarian Universalists, we recognize and affirm that we are part of an interconnected web of life. The connections with each other within this church, with the larger community, and with the whole world. And in that spirit, each Sunday we lift up those connections. And so in the spirit of how we are connected to one another, I want to remind those of you who are members of UUCUC that our annual membership meeting will be Sunday, June 6th after the service. And that will be via Zoom, as it was last year. And in preparation for that, there are a number of informational meetings coming up that actually are also part of our connections with the wider world. And there are 3 of them in the next day and a half. So I wanted to let you know about them. To find out more, you can look at your e-news, or you can go to the news section of our website. All are invited to these. You do not need to be a member of the church to attend. The first is our treasurer and other leaders talking about how our PPP loan that we received last year from through the federal government, how that has been used. That's coming up this afternoon. And then tomorrow, 2 of our really active social justice groups have informational meetings. One is our Immigration Justice Task Force, and they will be sharing about a resolution that will be in the annual meeting about our hospitality work. And then also on Monday, the Racial Justice Project is sponsoring their 3rd informational meeting about passing the 8th principle. And if you're interested to know more about the 8th principle, we've had several services touching on it, including last week's service. But this would be an opportunity to come and really ask questions and go deeper into your own discernment about this, because it will be part of the vote on June 6th. I am personally very excited about this, that we will be joining the community of communities of 8th Principle congregations around the country, hopefully. Each Sunday, we also, in this spirit of connection, we share half of our Sunday offering with an organization that is in alignment with our values. Often this organization is local, but in this case, for the month of May, it is the Equal Justice Initiative, which is, if you're not familiar with it, it was founded in 1989 by the civil rights attorney, Bryan Stevenson, now very well known nationally, and it provides legal representation to people who have been illegally convicted, unfairly sentenced, or abused in state jails and prisons. They challenge the death penalty and excessive punishment and provide re-entry assistance to formerly incarcerated people. Please give generously. part of our creating of community and being a church together is sharing the joys and sorrows of each other's lives. And during this part of every service, we connect with our own joys and sorrows, and if we're comfortable, we share something of those joys and sorrows to be read aloud to the community. So we'll have a time of this beautiful blessing song, which you can let wash over you, or you can hum along. And then there's still time to send in a joy or sorrow. You could also, if you don't want to deal with the Jamboard, you could send an appreciation if you wish at that time. I'll read those at the end. And we'll just have a time of blessing. Thank you to everybody who sent in something this morning. As always, sometimes there's little delays, so if I don't read your joy or sorrow or appreciation, we will make sure that they are in our e-news this week. Panay Beckett wrote in to say that actually the Immigration Justice Task Force information meeting is today, not tomorrow, at noon. Apologies for that. And from Cindy Ingold, very grateful to my mother, Jeannie Ingold, who gave birth to me on this day. Happy birthday, Cindy, 61 years ago. I miss her every day. From Jenny and Christy, feeling deep sorrow and anger at the bombing of the school in Kabul, Afghanistan, killing several dozen young girls. Disbelief. From Beth Renee Stafford. Had reconstructive surgery last Wednesday after breaking 2 bones in a foot. I'm still trying to get into Meadowbrook, but I have not yet gotten a response there or from Clark Lindsay home care team. Niece, who's been taking care of me, needs to return to her home in Chicago. Please keep me in your thoughts. Many thanks. From Kim Kramer. I'm so grateful my mother was in my life as long as she was, and how she helped me to be a better mom. And now I'm going to attempt to read from the Jamboard. There were a few technical difficulties, so if you don't hear what you wrote in read, please send it as an email, and again, we'll make sure to have it in the e-news on this week. And again, thank you to everybody who sent something in. So this is from me. Grateful for my truly rad mom, Harriet McNeil. And from Nina. My mom is the best. I love her. I like to see her every day. From E. Herzog. My mom, AJ Herzog, rocks. Love watching Zoe's playlist and other shows, as well as good old-fashioned talking with her. Love you, Mom. One just appeared here. Celebrating the generational joys of seeing... and they just moved it around. Don't move what I'm reading. Celebrating the generational joys of seeing one's daughters become mothers. To be part of this miraculous unfolding is a remarkable part of life. My own mother, long past, would revel in the wonderments of this generational blessing. From Sam. Mother Nancy, I give thanks for all you are, for your love, and for all you do to make the world a better place for others that know you. Your technologically savvy son, Sam. For Marian, this is from Jerry and Tim. For Marian Carden, who passed in 2018, and Florence Temple, who passed on New Year's Eve. Our first Mother's Day with both of them gone. Bittersweet. From Daniel, I am so happy to have such a loving, caring, passionate mother in my life. Here is one that just appeared. Thank you for all your sacrifices and hard work. You did not have many opportunities in your life. You did not get to fulfill your own dreams, but you were always planning the best way you could set me up for success. I am sorry I did not get a chance to thank you, and now it is too late. But you've honored her here. I'm just checking to make sure. There is one that unfortunately I can't read just due to it kind of ended up spread out across the page. So for that one, the person who sent that in, do please send it as an email so we can read it that way. And I'm sure there are many other appreciations, and if you did not get a chance to put something on the Jamboard or send something in to our shared joys and sorrows, just find a way in your heart or out loud to tell your mother, wherever she is in this life or the next, how you have appreciated her. We will now have a time of meditation, reflection, and beautiful music. I want to acknowledge, right before I say anything more, that as I do every Mother's Day, I want to honor that mothering and nurturing energy comes in many, many forms and many genders. In some cases, some of us had experiences growing up where our biological mothers were not even able to mother, and we were mothered by others. And as a non-mother myself, I feel like I can access that mothering energy in me. So when you hear the word mother, if you are not a mother, please don't think that this excludes you. Please know that we all have this within us. As I was preparing this sermon, I was struck by both the power of mothers' movements around the world and also about how many of the founders of those movements began their actions because of the loss of a child. When a mother brings a new life into the world, she opens her heart, however imperfectly, to this tiny being. And being a mother, whether biological or chosen, means caring for that life, nurturing that life, tending to that life, heart and soul. This is the reason I think that so many mothers' movements, back to Julia Ward Howe and that first proclamation, have been peace movements. Mothers, more than anyone, know the futility and idiocy of war and violence. I want to share 3 more stories today. The story of Cindy Sheehan, the story of the Argentinian Madres de la Plaza Mayo, and the story of the Mothers of the Movement. Cindy Sheehan's son, Casey, was killed in combat during the Iraq War in 2004. By October of that year, after her son's death, she realized that she was compelled to speak out against the war. For the presidential inauguration in January 2005, she traveled to Washington, D.C. to speak at the opening of an exhibit organized by the American Friends Service Committee called Eyes Wide Open, The Human Cost of War. And this exhibit displayed pairs of combat boots to represent U.S. military casualties, saying, for each one, behind these boots is one broken-hearted family. After that experience, Cindy created a new organization called Gold Star Families for Peace with other families of fallen veterans that she met at the inauguration. But what she came to be most known for was Camp Casey. She wanted to meet with President Bush to share her views about the war, but he refused. So she traveled to his ranch in Crawford, Texas, on a bus full of combat veterans. She said at the time, in terms of what she wanted to say to him, I'm going to say, and you tell me what the noble cause is that my son died for. And if he even starts to say freedom and democracy, I'm going to say, BS. You tell me the truth. You tell me that my son died for oil. You tell me that my son died to make your friends rich. You tell me that. You don't tell me my son died for freedom and democracy. For weeks, she lived in a tent on the road to the Bush Ranch, while thousands of anti-war supporters joined her, including some members of Congress. Later that year, she was arrested for protesting on the sidewalk in front of the White House, the first of many, many arrests. She has been described as the Rosa Parks of the anti-war movement and peace mom. To this day, she campaigns for peace and was critical of both Barack Obama and Donald Trump for their continued support of overseas wars. Thank you, Cindy Sheehan. Second story. In 1976, the democratic government of Argentina was overthrown by a U.S.-backed and U.S.-advised military coup. And for 7 years, there was a reign of terror in Argentina. As many as 30,000 people, dissidents, students, journalists, activists, disappeared, erased from the public record with no sign of arrest or trial. In 1977, a group of the mothers of the disappeared began demonstrating in the Plaza de Mayo in the capital and became known as Las Madres de la Plaza Mayo. These women shared the experience of each having had at least one child who had been taken by the military government. The women decided to risk a public protest, although gatherings of more than 3 people were banned, by linking arms in pairs as if on a stroll just across the street from the presidential office building. Soon, there were hundreds of women gathering. The mothers of the Plaza de Mayo were the first major group to organize against the Argentina regime's human rights violations. These mothers first came together to push for information on their own children, but this highlighted the human rights violations, and the scale of the protest drew press attention, raising awareness on a local and an international level. Their persistence to public remember and try to find their children, the sustained group organization, the use of symbols and slogans, and the silent weekly protests eventually changed the course of history in Argentina, although a number of the women who were part of that group lost their own lives by standing up. Although the dictatorship ended in 1983, to this day the Madres gather each Thursday to remember that the work of peace and support of human rights never ends. And finally, I want to lift up the Mothers of the Movement, a group of nationally known mothers who have lost their children to gun violence, and particularly to police violence and extrajudicial killings. And they have turned that grief into social and political action. They include Trayvon Martin's mother, Sabrina Fulton, Michael Brown's mother, Leslie McSpaden, Eric Garner's mother, Gwen Carr, Oscar Grant's mother, Wanda Johnson, and many others. They speak nationally and advocate for an end to racism and police brutality, and they support each other, hold each other up in their work for a world where these things will no longer be a daily event in the news, the loss of another child. These are hard stories, stories of unspeakable grief, of terrible crimes. And yet, they are also stories of affirming life, of a mother's absolute determination to protect the lives of other mothers' children, of great courage, of great humanity and love that we can all join. We can come into contact with our own deep commitment to the children of the world, no matter their age. Hard as these stories are, I am inspired by them to remember that although I am not a mother, still I can also act from the determination that every life is sacred. And we owe all children everywhere a life in a world at peace. Like the madres in Argentina, like all mothers everywhere, our work is never done. So let's link arms. Let's stroll across the public plazas and say, we walk for life. We stand for life. We won't ever stop. And again, remember, mothers of UUCUC, mothers of school-aged children during the pandemic, this is dedicated particularly to you and your work of this past year. Keeping your children safe, keeping all of us safe. Blessings.
Come, children of tomorrow, come, new glory dawns upon the world. The warring banners must be furled, the earth become a common home. From plain and field and town there sound the stirring rumors of the day. Old wrongs and burdens must make way for all to tread the common home. Divided we have long withstood the love that is our common speech, the comrade cry of each to each is calling us to humanhood.
Just want to remind you that we still have buttons that will be outside the door that say Rad Mom in several different designs. And also, we had some problems with the prelude playing properly. So if you want to stick around after the slide goes up with the fellowship time information, we'll play it as a sort of postlude to the postlude. So the music is particularly beautiful today. That one is extraordinary. And so I want to give everyone a chance to be able to hear it in its entirety. And deep gratitude to Juan for his beautiful, beautiful performances today. And I just have also one last thing to say. Thank you, rad moms of the world, and viva las madres.
chalice with these shared words written by Unitarian Universalist minister, the Reverend Elizabeth Sally Jones.
We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we are together again.